best. On our rights. Hey, hey. The heart of a man, the way of this land. Injustice for all was never the plan. Nah, it's never the plan. Justice beats for the two that part. Justice beats, best or smart. Justice beats for the two that part. Justice beats, best or smart.
All right, welcome in everybody. Good morning. How are we doing today?
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Justice Youth Talk Show. We're doing something different this morning, which we normally do at the end of the season, but we're going to do it a little earlier in the season this year. And we're doing a recap of our production team's most favored episodes from the JJ Show, which is the Just Us Youth, and the JB Show, which is the Just Us Beat Talk Show. So we're going to show clips initially on each segment, and then we'll discuss each clip and talk about why we liked it, what were some of the takeaways that we gleaned from each episode, and resources, recapping some of the resources mentioned in the episode. So you'll have an opportunity to jot a few things down. So what's our first episode?
All right,
Jules?
we can start with the first episode of our season, Qualified Immunity, if that sounds okay with everybody. All right.
Awesome.
Here
Let's
we
go.
are. Let's see. All right.
This is going to be a good one. Can't
Here we
wait to
go.
see this one.
So again, I'll say I think one valuable way to, or at least that I think about it, that helps me think through it is, I think most problems of police use of force, corrections officers' use of force, I think most of them have systemic roots. Roots in terms of the department's relationship with the community, histories of racism and also class-based discrimination, and a culture essentially of impunity, and a culture that sort of that glorifies kind of a hero approach to being an officer, which I think can sometimes encourage officers to use more force than necessary. So I think most of these problems come down to systemic solutions. And so the more we can put pressure on those systems, the municipalities, the cities, the counties that employ the officers, or the state departments that employ the corrections officers, let's say, the more we can put pressure on those systems to change how they operate, then I think the more successful we can.
Interesting. I can remember maybe a few seasons back, we had guests that were on the show that dealt with the issues of qualified immunity. And this gentleman touched on the very same things that is still an issue today. And that's about how police officers come into the police department and what types of evaluations and assessments are done. And they do them, but the frequency is not was not, in our opinion, up to par in terms of the frequency. I think that particular episode and this gentleman here suggested more frequent assessments and evaluations, like annually. And so that is something that I think a lot of people could really glean great information from, is looking at the frequency with which officers are assessed and evaluated, and making sure that there's follow-up should there be issues in that officer's ability to be effective in their job if there are glaring things that are brought up. So, yeah, that's my thought immediately when I think about that particular episode. Some of you all mentioned that was a good episode that you liked as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, I did want to just take a moment to clarify my understanding of qualified immunity. And what I understand is that it's a judicially created doctrine that protects government officials from personal liability and civil lawsuits. But of course, it's not an absolute. And I was just reviewing I think I was watching something on Court TV. You know, that's the kind of stuff I do in my free time. And there was a suggestion that we would probably see an improvement in some behaviors and some challenges, specifically with law enforcement officers, if they were able to actually be personally sued and not necessarily just the department in the broader sense. And so it's very, very interesting. I think there probably, maybe when this was established, there were some good tenets or some good reasons for initially doing it, but we see that there's a lot of egregious behavior. And I think at this point, it is clearly something that needs to be explored for some form of resolution. But that's my understanding of qualified immunity.
That is the definition of qualified immunity. And I had picked Professor Reinhardt as a guest on the show because qualified immunity is something that's been long argued about. But I recently read an article. Well, I had recently, when I first found him as a speaker, I had recently read an article about our current president being in support of qualified immunity. So although this is something that's been long argued and debated in between legislations, this is something that could really become a standard for everyone in the United States because we have a president in support of that now. And I really enjoyed the episode because I felt like Professor Reiner offered a lot of information, and he had argued in front of Congress about it, and he was really active within on this topic, and he felt strongly about it. He had a plethora of work and essays surrounding the topic, and it was important not just for minorities, but a significant amount of minorities, but for everyone, because it was just giving officers too much freedom to do whatever they wanted. So I thought it was an important topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Kat?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna say, I'm sorry. I thought it was an important topic to talk about too because it just showed me things have not changed regarding our judicial system. And it's important that everybody is very aware of what is actually going on. It made me think about accountability with officers, and even in cases where like their misconduct is extremely clear, they will still get away with it over the pretense of like following the law and restoring justice. And usually that comes down on marginalized communities. So I think this episode in particular was especially important for everybody to learn about.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I thought it was an extremely insightful conversation. I guess I have a question for the group, and if nobody knows the answer to that, that's totally fine. But I'm curious if anybody happens to know what these evaluations look like. for these officers? Just like, I'm curious if it's like a psychological evaluation and like, is it standardized? Like, what's the deal with that? Because I guess what my question is like, can they lie to like show that they're competent, or, you know, that they don't have these biases? I just feel like there needs to be a little bit more like strong regulation about that kind of stuff. So I'm curious if anybody knows about that.
Well, you know, I can't say that I know specifically exactly what's covered, but I know just in general that they are definitely assessing for mental stability with this psychological evaluation. And of course, we always hear them talk about suitability for the job. But even when we think about suitability for the job, we have to think about who's creating the criteria that determines suitability. And then also, you know, the psychological evaluation is designed to identify any potential issues that could hinder one's performance, or maybe even potentially create some risk for the department and the public. And so it will look at things, I'm assuming too, like that will encompass things like critical thinking skills, people's judgment and how they assess things. In terms of, you know, identifying the potential issues, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of scenarios that are presented that would indicate whether or not someone struggles with impulsivity, or if someone has a tendency toward violence, or if someone is really maybe easily triggered and does not have a great degree of restraint. And so when we look at this, you know, we're trying to determine, I think when they're trying to determine ensuring a good fit, you know, the evaluation will definitely help reveal a candidate's personality. It will help reveal a candidate's value system. And then with that process, it will determine whether or not the personality and the values align with the culture. What I will say is interesting is that this can be controversial, but sometimes when there are even challenging personalities and challenging values, they still align with the culture of the law enforcement agency in many instances. And so again, I want to be very careful, because I know that the law enforcement role is an incredibly difficult role. And it's not one that many people are raising their hands saying, I want to do this. So we also have to, you know, look at all of the things that will cause someone to pursue this line of employment, in terms of what are the requirements, you know, the criteria. Do we need to change it? Does it be modified? Does it need to be something where potentially there would be some higher standards than what we currently have? But that's my understanding of some of what is covered with those psychological evaluations determine, you know, someone's suitability for the job.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I guess I don't know if anybody has the answer for this either, but like the people who are conducting these like evaluations, I'm curious if they're like a third party, like non-biased, or is it someone that is within that police department? Because I feel like at that point there might be some, you know, some things that might be let slide, or some things that are just like biased, or I'm curious if it's like done by a different organization or like within the police department.
I don't.
That's an excellent point.
That's a great question, and it is a good point. But I don't currently think that that's something that's happening right now. Like, I don't think police officers are being evaluated before they are hired. So I think these are just like ideas. So I believe if they are being evaluated before hire, it should be like somebody from like the federal level, and most likely like a psychologist. And from my understanding, police departments don't usually have psychologists like on payroll. It's usually more of a federal role. But
And I can just speak from my limited experience and knowledge here in the state of Georgia. My understanding is that there is a psychological evaluation. Is actually an interview that is required. And also, my understanding is, and I don't know it exactly, my understanding is that there are psychologists on staff, at least for here, because when we have those instances where we have law enforcement officers that are involved in shootings, it's a standard protocol that you have to go speak with someone. Now, I don't know if those people are always internal candidates who are psychologists or if they're externally contracted. But my understanding is that an interview is still a part of a psychological exam that is conducted for those who are applying, and I think going through the academy, and even before they are graduated and are then sworn in. But again, that's my understanding from where I reside.
Okay. Okay, so basically, Karen, your response, I believe, is true with most departments. There is someone on staff. Now, in general, I looked up a very general understanding about what should be happening. And it says police evaluation psychological tests are typically assessed by licensed psychologists, often with expertise in police and public safety psychology, who conduct assessments, interviews, and interpret the results to determine a candidate's suitability for law enforcement. Okay, that's what's current today. All right. Very good, very good. This was great. This may be really something we should even do a part 2 on, because it would be neat to kind of explore what kinds of questions are asked. Also, what I saw was that there was a breakdown of like who conducts the assessment, excuse me, what is involved in the assessment, what are the why are these particular questions important to the assessment, and then what to expect during the process. So that's the written test, self-evaluation, and interview. So this particular episode really does deserve and warrant a part 2, which we'll explore in the next season. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to segment 2. Or is it commercial time? Oh, we got time.
Perfect.
To do
All
segment
right.
2.
Let's see. Let's do restorative justice.
Is it because of our iceberg theory where they didn't have?
Oh, my bad. I'm trying to figure out the formatting here.
That's all right. We're with you. We're not going anywhere.
Is it because of our iceberg theory where they didn't have any food at home? They didn't have any money to get the food at home? What caused the behavior? Whereas that's how we look at things in a restorative justice lens. What caused that fight to happen? Was it a build-up conversation prior to that fight? What were some things said? And how long was this going on? So whereas in the punitive systems for that youth wouldn't be heard. That youth would have to pretty much serve their time, serve their consequence, and then come back into society and act like, hey, okay, nothing happened. Whereas in the restorative justice lens, we want to hold them accountable for that action, but also hear their voice on why that action took place. And then we want to develop a plan to see what resources can we provide to make sure that that action doesn't happen again. Whereas it be food, whereas it just be somebody to have a conversation with to let them know, hey, these are some things that are going on in my household. I don't know who to talk to about it. I don't know where to go about it. And I don't know what to do about it, right? So we want to make sure that we're setting up systems that
All right.
All right. So I noticed Carla said she's unable to unmute herself.
Let me try it from my end. All right. Let me know if that worked.
You can hear me now? Yeah. Okay, all right. I'm going on mute. Okay, bye.
Bye. All right. I know Karen got something to say about this one and behaviors.
Well, I mean, definitely I do. And just, for the audience sake, I think he did a good job, but just to do a quick summarization, with restorative justice, it's really an approach to justice that aims to sort of repair the harm done by victims, or harm done repair the harm done to victims. But it's this focus of not just punishing the offender, But, you know, when it's appropriate and when there's agreement, bringing the victim and the offender together, and then sometimes even the community to address the larger issues. And as he very rightfully emphasized, the whole premise is accountability along with taking a different approach for punishment. And I think that's really necessary. And if I'm recalling correctly, for this particular gentleman, he works with the younger population. And I'm not saying this is not an approach that could not be used with everyone, but I think it's very beneficial to take this kind of approach with young people when we're talking about, we always hear the discussions about the brain is not fully formed and they're still struggling with the moral development and all these kind of things. Then we really do have to take that kind of approach to not trying to institute a punishment that is going to have a person locked down for the rest of their life. They're taking an approach that does say, we think there, despite this offense, there is some redeeming value in this young person. And I think that's the great benefit of restorative justice, that there's a belief, excuse me, there is some redeeming value, and that there are many instances where you have victims who are willing to come together and connect with that victim so that things can be moved forward. So again, I think it's something needs to continue to be widespread, but I'm very glad that we're talking about it.
Yeah, also just like to add on to that, there's always value in understanding what's behind somebody's somebody's actions so they can understand why they are getting the consequences they're getting. We are in therapy, so that's kind of like our work. Just understanding why people do what they do and giving people a lending ear so they can talk about their troubles and not lash out in a way that deserves harsh consequences, especially for kids if they don't have that outlet at home or if they're not able to access therapy. It's extremely important that this restorative justice work is in schools, especially public schools in inner city areas, because that's where you're going to find a lot of people who need it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
One of the things that I saw, teaching at a school, which was an alternative school, but our focus was to be trauma sensitive. So these young people are coming into classroom already with trauma that has dictated their ability even to receive the education that, you're trying to give them. And I'm turning around and one teacher after another is kicking kids out. And the question would often be asked to me, well, how are you able to keep a child in a classroom? Is because I understood, first of all, that if I've got a drawer full of snacks in my room, their first issue was the fact that they were hungry. So before I could ever reach them, I had to say, okay, what do I need to do to get this young person's attention? Yeah, they're being disruptive. They may be using foul language. They may not be prepared for the day. But restorative justice said to me in that instance, how can I restore this environment in such a way for him or her so that they can learn? So, someone, I think it was Lauren just mentioned about in the public schools, in these underserved communities where these young people are coming into an environment where we have an expectation of them. They don't know how to move in there. So how can I create an environment that says, hey, you're safe, that yes, I'm going to give you a second. Sometimes I'm giving students 5th, 6th, and 7th chances because my desire is that you stay in this place so you can learn. And from a teacher's mindset, you have to, when you're dealing with particular populations, you have to have a restorative justice mindset because these young people are coming into your classroom already traumatized by something, and we have to find a way to get to them.
I 100% agree with that. And like Miss Karen brought something up that made me think like it's true that, these children that are in these schools, they don't have, maybe they're not like, their brains aren't fully developed. They're not, I feel like especially it's important in that age group because they take those skills with them for the rest of their lives. So like it's especially important for young people to like be able to witness restorative justice because when they go later in their like adult lives, they'll have those tools and they'll have that understanding that will be able to support them. Yeah.
Great. Great. Yeah, we do need to be mindful. A lot of times we're assuming students are coming from environments that are like ours, and that's the first mistake. I like the point Carla raised that was very basic and simple. They didn't have breakfast. And you try to learn on an empty stomach. What if they haven't had breakfast since they haven't had anything to eat since they left school Friday afternoon? Because a lot of schools report most kids get their major meals when they're in school. That's basic. And so we need to take time. Take time. I agree with that, Carla. Yes. All right. All right, Jules. We're coming up on our 10:30
All right.
commercial. I think we can come back for our third discussion
We'll
point.
see you soon.
Introducing Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Just Us Youth Talk Show.
All right, welcome back, everybody.
Hello. All right, you all ready for
Absolutely.
topic
So
3?
this next one is going to be nutrition in the prison system.
Sitting in the dining hall that somebody took one item off of and left the rest of it there. So we're also wasting a lot of food. The environmental waste implications of that, I think, are huge and kind of unexplored. But I think we're also, as taxpayers, wasting a lot of money with correctional food service, some of which is heavily privatized, right? As far as anyone can tell, about probably half the states privatize their food service. Missouri being one of them. Missouri contracted out its food service to Aramark a couple years ago, and with pretty bad results. So we're spending a lot of money as taxpayers, millions and millions of dollars a year feeding people, only to have most of the food thrown out at the end of the day. Our surveys say that half to 2/3 of the food is sometimes thrown away just because it's unpalatable, inedible, and that kind of food waste.
All right. Who wants to tackle the nutrition one?
Well, I'll jump in real quickly. I thought that was an incredibly interesting topic, and quite honestly, is one I had not considered a discussion, like a discussion point or a topic. Just because the premise is like when people are incarcerated or they serving their time, who really, the general premise is who really cares what they're having to eat, what they have to endure. They're suffering because of decisions they've made. And so sort of just in some preparation, I was just trying to look to see if there's additional information. And it looks like Brown School of Public Health has an undergraduate journal on public health. And there was a particular topic called Beyond the Food, How Prison Nutrition Policy Contributes to Lasting Chronic Diseases. And we already know that the prison systems are heavily full of, the carceral system full of brown, Latino, and Black and people of that persuasion. And we struggle the most with a lot of the chronic health conditions like cancer, high blood pressure, stroke-related things, obviously diabetes, congestive heart failure. And so it just was really interesting how it just talked about the epidemic of chronic disease, and incarceration directly relates to the failure to abate the health disparities. And they just talked about one way to be able to do that is the first step would be to improve the health of prisoners, of those within the carceral system, breaking that cycle. But I think even before that, that is maybe one step, but the step above that is we have to first continue to care about the people that are incarcerated. And I think that's really where the struggle is as it's related to making changes in prison nutrition, is that first we have to address the fact that, you know, a large part of our society does not really care about those who are incarcerated, whether they are incarcerated and they're saying they're innocent and they're pursuing appeals, or those who even found guilty. We don't care enough about humans and human rights to really impact this change for the prison nutrition system. Those are just my thoughts.
Right. And, you know, as I think about it, I can't remember if this gentleman mentioned anything about the privatization of prisons and what that looks like in terms of uh, cost over quality of food. So a lot of times when you privatize prisons and you turn them over for a corporation to manage and administer, you run into issues with the bottom line being money. That's even in the healthcare. When they privatize the healthcare within prisons, it's always cost driven. And so the same thing with the food as well.
I thought this conversation was so interesting. I guess I never really thought about like nutrition in the prison system. I guess the only thing I ever really knew about it was like what I would see in media and like TV shows like that would take place in the prison system, and there wasn't much emphasis on it. It all just seemed like normal. I'm actually, and this is, feel free to discuss this, but I'm very I'm curious to see, like, I know that food is something that can help someone connect with their culture and their community. And I think that it's a great way to, you know, help people who are in the carceral system to find community and to feel connected to themselves and like the people around them. So I'm curious, like, if anybody has this thought or what it would be like if there was options for like cultural foods, for example. I know that's a big leap from what we have now, but I guess it's wishful thinking, but
well, we do need people to think in that vein, Jules, but I think most of the country would probably be in an uproar if they even heard us, you know, trying to give this level of consideration to people that many consider inhumane. But I think it's a discussion that needs to be had. And again, when I was looking at that article, and I'm trying to be real quick, it just sort of talked about the Bureau of Prisons Food Service Manual. It says it governs policy at federal prisons and states that inmates should be provided nutritionally adequate meals, but they don't really define or describe what nutritionally adequate is. And then when I looked at some things about there being a requirement for a dietitian on staff, they have that, they meet that criteria, but then the dietitian is just looking at meeting the state's minimum calorie count and vitamins. So even if people have the right things in place, according to the very few food laws that are around carceral systems, the focus is still on just giving the bare minimum, which again to me then speaks to the level of care and concern we have for the people who are incarcerated, and the fact that this is indirectly related. I mean, those systems that no longer allow, you know, educational progress in the system, you can't go to school. There's just no global investment in the lives of people so that those who are released can come out and be productive. It's just like we're throwing people away until. And so we don't really care if their food is nutritional or good for them, or if it creates chronic conditions or not. But your point is well taken, Joy. It would be interesting. I don't know who would take up that mantle, but they would have to have a strong backbone.
You're absolutely right, because we already struggle with stuff without including nutrition. Okay, so it's yeah. I need to find out who has access to the section to the right of the screen where you can pull up captions and place things in the lower thirds. Are you familiar? You remember how when we normally change stuff out on the screen? Because I think we're missing some valuable opportunities for stuff to be put in the lower thirds, like these links that are being provided.
100%. I will work on it.
Okay, great. Because I just put in our private chat the link regarding religious rights and food and nutrition, like Ramadan. Some of the complaints that we get on my day job is during Ramadan season. A lot of times the prisons are not adhering to the religious rights of those who should have an alternate meal. Okay, then that's a good link right there. And then another link talks about the privatization of food in prisons. So I think that would be very helpful to our audience.
I just
Bingo.
want to
There we
add,
go.
just before we move on to our next episode, reading up on what they call a Nutriloaf. And the gentleman says, you know, imagine taking everything from the back of your refrigerator that's old and combining it all into one and serving it to yourself. He said that is what happens. And I was reading an article written by someone who's currently incarcerated, and he says that's what happens. You get what they call these Nutriloaves, and we think about ourselves. We have people out here who are not incarcerated who have a hard time getting nutritious food. He said over the years, all the fresh fruits and vegetable things that will be nutritional have slowly moved out of what they're providing for them to eat. And he said, incarcerated foods in the United States are no longer served with their original system. Instead, the food has been stripped down into a starch. It is then fortified with a meal replacement powders or served with a beverage containing the same. So they get what they believe getting the most out of their money by giving them nothing, fortifying food that's been stripped of its nutrients and then fortified. So we think about that for yourselves. And I think several of you all have mentioned we have to care about people, even after the crime, that if our desire is that they return to society better than what they came in, we have to treat them humanely, and that's not going on.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I was thinking during this whole conversation how it's like we see that what we're doing right now isn't working. It's not working. We have high rates of recidivism. We have, people who don't feel comfortable going back into like the public, who don't have the resources given to them that they need to have a successful life outside of the prison system. And I'm just like, I guess the feeling that comes up for me is frustration, because you see how this is all just not working. But for most people, it's more convenient to turn a blind eye than to actually start caring. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what's coming up for me. I think that like if we see a system's flawed and it's clearly not doing what we hope it's gonna do, but we're not taking any change making any change or taking any measures to like make it different or make it better, then it's just like, what's going on?
Absolutely,
I agree.
Jules. Absolutely.
I agree. Yep. That's the main concern. I like how Carla helped to tie that in, because even if we're talking about Nutriloaf, and any of the other issues that are persistent with respects to conditions of confinement, it all goes back to, do we care about the humanity of a person, the humanity and the dignity of a person, no matter where they are. It's just basic dignity.
By a show of hands, how many of us think a Nutriloaf is advertised appetizing and would want to eat it? It just, yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah.
None of us will volunteer to eat a Nutriloaf.
There it is. Something to think about, especially the description that Carla gave about what they put in it, what they put together. I just posted one that talked about how it was supposed to be nutritious, but at the same time unappealing. So you put together a Nutriloaf with the idea of it being nutritious with the stuff you put together, and then you with the understanding that it's also going to be unappealing. Help me understand that. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If we're done with that segment, let's go on to our final segment.
Looks
topic
good.
4.
All right. So the last recap that we're going to be doing is the juvenile justice system in Native nations. Here we go.
The United States, since its inception, I mean, when we talk about our young people, when we talk about families and child welfare, that is the direct result of United States policy towards Native nations. The policies have always been assimilative and genocidal. The intent was always to get rid of us. And the problem is they didn't count on us to be who we are, which is tenacious and resilient as hell, right? Pardon my French, but it's like they didn't count on that part, that we are made of those things that our ancestors gave us, right? And
Absolutely.
the thing is that as there's been this evolution in different systems, you know, I think about this all the time, like the court systems and the entire body of law that applies to the that system was created and it didn't have anything to do with us. We had our own justice systems. We had our own process for dealing with trouble and problems in our community. And so it's kind of like if I went down to Mexico and created a court system and said, okay, all y'all in this neighborhood,
All right.
You know what I found interesting when she was running down all of the ecosystem, all of the things that were already in their own ecosystem, and why there was a need to replace that with someone else's ecosystem. They already had their own judicial system, education system, the whole nine. Why was it important to come in and dismantle what already existed for them in a very quality, humane way?
That's what you do when you are not really interested in the well-being of others and are more focused on issues related to control and being dictatorial. It's really it's sort of hard and challenging for me to make some comments on this that I don't want to have me far left or far right. But I think globally, it is a lack of concern about the people who are impacted by your change, by the change that you're trying. It's a total disregard for the value of people, a total disregard for someone's culture, a total disregard for or any belief in the value of institutions or practices and protocols that are already in place that have governed a person's way of life. It's simply a decision where we don't see value in this. You haven't been able to self-correct. We're going to step in and we're going to do what needs to be done. And I thought she was a great speaker. Again, I like these very specific topics because it gives us a great opportunity to be better informed. You know, I've looked around and found some things that just talk about disparities in tribal youth incarceration have just grown worse over the course of the last decade. And this is from a December 2023 article. And it just talks about the tribal youth being more than 3 times as likely to be incarcerated than their white peers. And just the general approach that is sort of taken to addressing the issues. It's just incredibly dismissive. And it seems like, again, the answer, and we've seen this with other populations of people, the answer tends to be incarceration when there's challenge.
We can't get you to conform. Well, then we're going to make you conform by restraining you. One of the things that I as I was listening to the speaker, that I have been thinking about is how we, in general, do a good job of compartmentalizing groups of people. We've done that since the very beginning. And we have moved away of looking at the people's humanity. And I say that because we have all these different groups that are vying for their own humanity, as if we don't all have the same humanity, that we all want to be able to take care of ourselves, to feed ourselves, to be well, to receive an education. And we have to do it in pockets, whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's the white community, whether those that don't have or whose economic status, we're all doing this separately. And as I was listening to her, and Native Americans being the first displaced people of this country, of this land, how it was easy to become focused in your own culture and what happened to us. And she just brought it full circle for me. Hey, we're all struggling. Everybody's humanity is being stripped, and they keep us blinded by using our color or our culture when it's really about power and wealth. People have power. That's really what it's all about, and help bringing it back. So that's what I got. That's what I heard out of it. So as I move forward in whatever movement, I want to move in the vein that I'm trying to better everybody's humanity, no matter where you are, no matter what you're struggling with. I want to lift my lens a little bit more, to broaden it, to look for the well-being of our people.
Yeah. Once again, this is like a topic that nobody is talking about, or at least nobody is talking about enough. I think when we first start, when this podcast aired, I learned a lot more. These are things that should be taught in school. These are things that should be implemented into our education system that I knew absolutely nothing about. And I think it just shows you how needed this education is for everybody.
100%. I totally agree with that. And then it kind of makes me think about how, yes, there's a blatant disrespect for people who aren't part of like the dominant culture of the United States. And I think a lot of it comes from fear, like fear that, you know, the dominant culture has, that we're not going to be in control. And that there's an aspect of like, we need to have everybody under control, even if they have had their own pre-established systems that work for them. I mean, Native Americans have lived on this land for centuries and centuries and centuries, and their systems have worked for them. And so it's mind-boggling to think that, you know, when colonization happened, that people felt like they had the right to come and impose their beliefs in a way that erases Native American history and culture, when it's such a beautiful source of knowledge. And we can definitely learn a lot from those communities and implement those strategies that they've been using for hundreds of years into our own systems. And just like, I feel like in the United States, it's often like, if it's different, then we don't want it. And I think that's such a harmful thing for us, because we're losing so much knowledge and we're losing so many different solutions that could potentially make the problems that we're struggling with in the United States so much better if we just open our ears and listen.
Yeah.
That is so you said something very important for me there. They were on this land long before we were. They know how to cultivate it. They were able to survive. And what we did learn from them, we took and made it our own, or, you know, shifted it in such a way. But why not go to the source, those that have the knowledge? And yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's also not, I think it's very important for like Native nations. But I also think that's not necessarily exclusive to that one population. I think when we broaden our perspectives and take into account other cultures, like if we take in account like Mexican experience, Black experiences, like all of these things, if we just listen, there's so much that we can learn to make this system work for everybody, because it's really only catered for one specific group of people and it's disregarding everybody else.
Yeah, this actually makes me think about the banning of DEI and how much people's cultures are being erased to fit into some majority or like natural way of being that pleases the people that are in control, the people that are in power. Um, and this is one of the prime examples of that. People's entire cultures, people's entire lives are being erased, and it's not, you know, it's not talked about enough. Um, and because of the ban of DEI, because that these things are not being taught in schools, we are losing so much value to America. And what makes, you know, America great, I guess, is the diversity of all of the populations that live on here. So I think it's a shame, and also it does need to be advertised and talked about more. So I'm so glad she came on and told us more about it, because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, 100%, Lauren. I totally agree with that. And that also brings up this thought that has been really scary and heavy on my mind when it comes to like the banning of the Department of Education and sort of leaving that up to the states of what's being taught in schools.
Yeah.
It's really scary because sometimes, you know, obviously there's people in positions of power who are going to want to push a certain agenda that disregards other people. And so, like, when we talk about education and the importance of education, it's scary to think that that power is in the hands of people who might not want us to have that knowledge. And I think it's always been important to advocate for that kind of education, but like even more so now. And also just like being able to spread the word within community, because if our schools aren't going to be teaching us things about diversity and things about all those sorts of, you know, LGBTQ problems, problems of like minority communities, then we have to take that upon ourselves and we have to do the work within our communities as well to have that knowledge available for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, these have been some great topics. Great topics, very enlightening, and as has already been said by Elaine, that there appears to be some opportunity to maybe really revisit a few of the topics and elaborate some more and take it a little bit further. I think these are things that are really, really important for people to be familiar with. And again, these are just topics that just are not discussed. And I think in our current climate, is a great opportunity to discuss a lot of things so that we can be prepared to self-correct this course that we are on at whatever point we are called to participate in the self-correction, because it's definitely going to have to come.
And I just want to say to our audience, although that we didn't have an opportunity for questions today because we were, just doing a recap, please share with us anything that was spoken today that you may want to hear a little bit more about, something that may have spurred on a question or a concern that we can further elaborate on. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn. As you can see here, we're learning things as we're doing the research, as we're putting our podcast together. We have questions ourselves. And like Lauren mentioned, hey, the Native American podcast, a lot of that was new to her because it's not being taught in our classroom. So this is, for me, a plug to parents on behalf of your young people. I need you all to invest in your education. And if your investment simply means your voice, if that's all you have to give, speak up. Start advocating for education that helps keep us together as in our humanity with one another, but also helps to keep cultures alive. Not just your culture, but everyone's culture alive in this country. So that's just my plug for this morning.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I guess we are about to wrap up and maybe speak about what our audience can be looking forward to on our next show. I don't know who has that, but please take it away.
It's Lauren. That's you,
Yes.
Lauren.
So our next show, we are going to be talking about the incarceration of the LGBTQIA community. Another topic that definitely is not talked about enough. So we're going to get some more insight on that. I'm very excited. Yeah.
And that's in the context of the juvenile justice system.
Yes, that is.
Lauren.
And outside of it,
Okay, great.
people who have, people who are, who've now gotten out of the judicial system and are living lives now. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, we trust that this recap has been a sense of a resource for you all to go back and look at the YouTube channel and pick up some of these 4 shows that we've discussed here today. Take an opportunity to look at them, jot down the whole, in looking and reviewing the whole episode, you may want to jot down some questions and even some of the resources that are mentioned in those respective episodes. This has been a great recap, and we appreciate you being with us this Saturday. And we will be back at you next Saturday with the JJ Show that Lauren just mentioned with another episode. Once again, thank you so much for being with us and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.